It's wonderful to have with us Catherine Philp from the London Times, who is joining from Kyiv, of all places. Catherine, great to have you here with us today. And Felicia Schwartz is joining us actually from outside Chicago, believe it or not. Felicia is with Politico and is following foreign affairs there. So, Felicia, let's just start with you. What a day it is. The summit is about to get started. The presidents are in the air as we speak, going to Anchorage to land there for a discussion about the future of Ukraine, and if it's up to Russia, the future of bilateral relations and business relations and arms control and all the other minor irritants that exist there. But the topic before us is Ukraine. So, Felicia, just set the scene a little bit. How did we get to this point? Why are we having a meeting in Alaska, and particularly why are we having a meeting between the president of the United States and the president of Russia about a war in which the United States is not a protagonist, but Ukraine is, and they're not there?
Well, President Trump came to office saying he was going to end this war in 24 hours. He felt that the personal relationship he had built with President Putin in the first term would really help him out here. And I think, he's learned, 6, 7 months into the presidency that relationship has not really served him very well, that this is very hard. But he still really feels like, he needs to look him in the eye, take his temperature, get the measure of the man. He's dispatched Steve Witkoff and Marco Rubio to try to do the same thing. It really hasn't gone anywhere. In fact, the past few months have been some of the most dangerous moments in the war, in fact, in the whole period that it's been going on. So, in fact, you could say it's had the opposite effect. But he still feels like before he can kind of give up on this, levy the sanctions he's been threatening, if we really think he's going to do it, that he needs to sit one-on-one with Putin, that they're two great men, two great leaders, and they can hash this out.
And it's kind of interesting. So this is, in some ways, it's about him, Donald Trump, as opposed to trying to figure out how to end the war. Because presumably, if you wanted to end the war, you'd have to have everybody on the table. So this is really about Trump saying, I'm a deal maker and I know how to do this. I haven't been able to do it over the phone, so I need to do it in person. And so when you talk to people in the White House, what are they thinking about how this will go about? What do they expect that will come out of this?
I think they hope that they can get some sort of gesture from Putin towards a ceasefire or, some sort of practical steps forward. Trump has said, if things go well, maybe he'll fly Zelensky into Alaska. He'll stick around. He and Putin will give a joint press conference if things went well. Trump will be able to tell right away if this will go how it wants to go. So I think they've really tried to temper expectations. First they described it as a listening meeting. Then they said, we want to get a second meeting and a ceasefire. Trump can be a little, the White House is telling us that he's prepared, that he wants a deal, that he's hopeful. The Europeans have come out of all the consultations hoping, feeling like Trump has heard them out, that they're not going to negotiate Ukraine's territory away without Ukraine, that they might be open to some security guarantees at the end. But yeah, I think, anyone who's negotiated with Putin understands that he will tell you what you want to hear. He might even agree to a deal. But, all the diplomatic, I'm thinking about Minsk. I'm thinking about, there was a deal between the U.S. and the U.S. and Russia over Syria. Like all these deals basically fail on a technicality, never really comes to fruition. So I do still think Trump maybe has heard all of that, but thinks that he is different.
He is different, and I guess, Catherine, from the perspective of Kyiv, this is a deeply uncomfortable meeting, of course, because it is between two world leaders that excludes Ukraine directly, and Ukraine is the victim in this war. So give us a sense of what people on the street are saying, since you're there, but also leaders are saying about this meeting, both their hopes and their fears.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivo. Oh, look, there is that horrible expression, if you're not around the table, you're on the menu. And I think there is a sense of that in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it's a feeling that's become quite familiar here. It's happened a lot, but I do think that the diplomatic succor of the last week towards Zelensky that he's been shown by the Europeans and finishing up in London with Starmer. I think that has been very important for him, not only going into this summit, but actually here domestically, where he has been in a bit of trouble recently, as you will all be aware. He's had these protests over a sort of very ill-advised move against anti-corruption bodies. So there's that. Where ordinary Ukrainians are concerned, and indeed those fighting for Ukraine, the expectations are very low. I think that it sort of ranges from. I mean, I've literally had an eye roll from someone discussing it today. So it goes from that right up to extreme nervousness and sort of tentativeness. I have friends who are going to meet for a boozy dinner tonight before the curfew kicks in, and they all have to go home separately from where they will watch the press conference. And the first thing they will be looking for is whether Putin comes out alongside Trump, as he's indicated that it will only be joint if they've got somewhere. So I know a lot of people who will be getting up at 3 a.m. Kyiv time to watch that, which frankly makes a change from getting up at 3 a.m. and going to the bomb shelter. I think that the most anyone, if there could even be a temporary ceasefire out of this, for many people here who are utterly fatigued by the conflict, that would be extraordinary. What they are keenest to avoid is getting carved up on that table in Alaska without even knowing it's happening.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's talk a little bit about that hopeful aspect. I mean, if what's the best case outcome that people in Kyiv are looking for at the end of this meeting? If if they could write the script, what is it that they would, which is kind of hard with both Putin and Trump, but just what if they could do so? What's the outcome they're hoping to get out of this? What we know what the
Yeah,
fears are, but what do you think they're hoping?
I'm not. I don't know how big a genre fantasy fiction is in Ukraine, but it would have to be the realms of that. It would be nothing less than for Donald Trump to tell Putin to get the hell out of Ukraine now, to grant instant or near instantaneous access, membership of NATO, to get either solid security guarantees or even a peacekeeping force on the ground, um, for the supply of weapons and long-term guarantees of that continuing, to to be stated outright and put in as concrete a form as possibly can. I mean, their demands in that sense are as maximalist as Putin's. The difference being that is, of course, that they are the ones who've had their territory invaded. Now, the idea that there might be a ceasefire, I know there's a lot of people who feel that might just give them a bit of oxygen to breathe, but I don't think anyone's under any illusions that would mean anything substantive long term. And of course, the great fear here is that Trump may wish to bank a ceasefire or something like it, or even walk away. But bank a ceasefire that allows Putin to come back later and finish off the job, even if he pauses it now. And then all of these things, if you can believe it, these are still all better than what people actually expect, which is almost nothing.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And by the way, the Air and Water Show in Chicago is happening this weekend, so they're flying F-35s over our building, and there's no war going on for those of you, at least as far as there is one going on in Kyiv, but hopefully the shooting is stopped for the moment, at least in Kyiv, certainly not on the front lines.
Well, we've had already one air alert today, so
Yeah, you would
judge of
hope
that.
that he wouldn't Putin wouldn't be shooting at Kyiv at the same time he's talking to Trump. But you know what? Anything is possible. There's no doubt about it. I just wanted, if you hear the sound and it's not coming from Catherine, it's coming from me. It's because there is some, the Blue Angels are flying over our apartment building here. Felicia, does the administration recognize the risk of a ceasefire agreement? The sense that if you have a ceasefire, that this is, and you haven't settled anything else, that actually gives the Russians a time to reset, of course, the Ukrainians as well, but also that it maintains the status quo that is completely unacceptable to the Ukrainians. Do they recognize that a ceasefire may, in fact, not necessarily be the best thing to come out of this?
I think some people in the administration are certainly more clear-eyed than others. I think one of the things I've heard from some of their European interlocutors is that they see this as a very kind of iterative process, that like we have to take things one step at a time. Let's sit, let's feel him out. Can we get a ceasefire? Can we start talking? So I think that, Trump had campaigns on ending these wars. It's a top priority for him. I think that they are willing to, I mean, again, I think that their red lines, they've refused to set any. What we might guess their red lines are probably pretty distant from Ukraine's and maybe even Europe's. So I think that there is a very much like mixed bag here. But I also think that, the thing that Europe and Ukraine have tried to impress upon the Americans is that, Putin is not going to stop unless, he thinks he can fight into next year. The Ukrainians have some intelligence suggesting that they're like rearming and refitting for that. Like they believe that he's really responded to pressure, and even some administration talking to us ahead of the meeting have said that they think, these sanctions on India, they've started to allow American weapons to go to Ukraine, even if it's, Europe that's paying for them, that all these things is what kind of like forced Putin to talk. And I think what the Europeans would say is exactly, and the Ukrainians, of course, like exactly. So, the answer is more pressure, not less. So I think they understand that to a point. But in terms of, just going back to your question of the best case scenario, I think there are plenty of people who just kind of hope this meeting will fail, right? Because then I think the US can go ahead. Trump won't have much cover not to put on sanctions. There's a lot of pressure in Congress for that. They could continue to do other things that might put pressure on Russia, even if it's not the best case scenario. Um, but, even the last administration, which you could say was a good supporter of Ukraine, said this would end at the negotiating table. And even Kamala Harris's team was thinking about how they would, try to kind of bring this to talk. So in some sense, what's happening is probably would have happened under any scenario, even if you had a leader that was less skeptical of Ukraine and this conflict.
Yeah, and I think Felicia, that really is the point, right? I mean, you have a leader who seems to be interested in ending the war because he's promised to end the war, rather than ending the war because it's important to achieve a political objective,
Yeah.
which is the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine, which is what everybody else seems to be interested in. And uh, 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 Catherine, in the conversations that you're having with the Ukrainian and European leaders, of course, how convinced are they, particularly after the meeting on Wednesday, with the president, that Trump actually sees their point of view? In some ways, he's made all kinds of interesting noises that he might back a security force, of course not in NATO, but and that he will. There will be severe consequences if there's no agreement on peace, etc. Do the Europeans and the Ukrainians think that Trump has slowly come to their side in this question, or are they still skeptical and they don't quite know what's going on?
I think there's a lot of sort of holding your breath and trying to do as much as you can, and sort of parking that idea of, assessing whether he's come round, just trying to lay out some lies, because it's not 2 or 3 weeks ago that we were talking about the Trump pivot towards Ukraine, and then he seemed to pivot away again. And amusingly, it may amuse you to learn that the newest folk hero in Ukraine is Melania Trump, because of the statement from Donald Trump that he has these lovely conversations with his great friend Vladimir, and then he goes back and Melania tells him about what's been hit that night. So yeah, there's a great a great deal of amusing commentary around the idea that Melania is the secret savior of Ukraine because she's pushing these things. But I think that also actually, as an amusing aside, it also underlines something that's very critical going into this conversation later today, and something that the Europeans are aware of, the Ukrainians are aware of, is that Donald Trump is very emotionally driven. As well as driven by his own personal impulses, as Felicia, mentioned, how everything is personal with him. I mean, I have to write a piece on my recollections of the Helsinki summit, and which was, of course, ghastly. But when I thought back on it, I thought, so much of that was actually driven by his own insecurities and anxieties about the fact that he could not divorce the notion of Russian meddling in the American election from the notion that from questions over his legitimacy. So because he couldn't do that, he saw it as an attack on him. Now, I think the fact he's coming into this summit as a much more confident person, and someone who with a legitimate election victory behind him, it should be something of a sort of hope or comfort that there's perhaps not this. But back to that emotion issue, he really hates seeing pictures of war and of injured children and things like that. It's the only thing that seems to have moved the dial at all on Gaza. Not that it's translated into a change in policy, but he didn't like what he saw. He didn't like Bashar al-Assad gassing children in Syria and acted on it. And he obviously doesn't like when he sees these pictures in Ukraine. So this idea that he likes to stop the bloodshed. I mean, there is. I had to hear these reports today that he called up Jens Stoltenberg and said, "Can you tell them to give me the Nobel Peace Prize?" I mean, he'd love the Nobel Peace Prize, but I do think there's something curiously genuine in his desire to stop bloodshed, because he really doesn't like seeing pictures of it. I don't know if it's his kind of like germphobic OCD thing, or whether he actually has an incredibly strong, I'm not going to call it empathic, because I don't think it's that, but he does have some strong reaction to these things. So I think his desire to say, I have stopped the bloodshed, is a genuine one. The problem is, as we all know, just saying stop now doesn't lead to a solution, and it doesn't address any of the root causes. And we still don't know, the Europeans don't know, the Ukrainians don't know, if he's really prepared to make good on the kind of action, kind of sanctioning against the Russian economy that would be necessary to really, really hobble its ability to prosecute this war. And I mean, to that, we should also, I think, be relieved that he's going to come out of this meeting and then have this larger meeting with what passes for grown-ups these days in the administration, like Marco Rubio, some of those people present. I think it's probably good that JD Vance is safely off in Scotland as well, or people say he's been changing this week. But there are some other voices in the room before he comes out and says anything publicly, and that has to be a good thing, because one-on-one with Putin or with anyone, Trump can be seduced.
I think you raised a lot of really interesting points, Catherine, and Felicia. Pick up on any piece of it. One of which I'm particularly sort of focused and interested on is this point of he wants to end the bloodshed. And while he keeps on talking about 7,000 people, I think he said again today, were killed in the last week, I think the bloodshed he really cares about is the bombing of the cities. That seems to be, he takes that kind of personally as an affront. And that's the Melania story and everything else. And that leads me to suggest that if that's the way that Putin reads it, he may in fact say, well, you know what, why don't we stop this long range fighting and shooting at cities and at energy, which of course has been very effective. The Ukrainians have been hitting energy sites all over Russia very effectively, and it would help him to have an end to that. And that will be enough for Trump to say, "Look, I stopped a major part of the war, and now we're going to have new strategic relationships." Yeah, I agree. Marco Rubio will be there, and Pete Hegseth will be there, and the JCS chairman, which is interesting, will be there in this larger meeting they're having today. But in the end, this is an administration in which one person makes all the decisions, and Vladimir Putin knows that. And so, what's the chance, Felicia, that this ends up in which Trump claims victory? But in fact, the victory he claims is nothing of the sort.
I think that's kind of the $1,000,000 question. I think it's relatively high. If you think about, this, he's branded himself as like the peacemaker in chief. He says that he's notched 6 peace deals since being in office. I mean, depends how you count. Also, I think they've been, they're doing like DRC Rwanda, where, for example, they've like reached a framework, but all of the most delicate details still need to be worked out. Armenia, Azerbaijan, they kind of hopped on the end of a process that had been in train for some time. And again, also devils in the details there. Israel and Iran he claims credit for, but you might say that they contributed to that one. So, solving a crisis of your own making. But the ones that have eluded him, obviously, are the big ones, Gaza and Russia, Ukraine. And he really wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He's pissed that Obama got one. He thinks he's the serious, Obama got one, didn't even do anything. He's done all these deals. And, for what? The world doesn't appreciate him or recognize him. So I think he desperately wants to come out with something that can feed this narrative, deal maker in chief or peacemaker in chief. And so I think it's relatively high. I think he'll be very tempted to claim victory. And like Catherine said, I do think that the Europeans were very encouraged by the calls that they had with him and his team this week, after there was some confusion with Witkoff last week. But no one knows what will happen when Trump's alone in the room with Putin. And Putin is a former KGB, maybe not even former. He's a KGB guy. He knows how to flatter Trump. Trump really sees Putin as a great leader on his level. Putin understands this and wants to do business with him. They've been talking a lot about the bilateral relationships. The people in their delegation suggest they want to talk about business and economics. There are some in Trump's team. I've heard like particularly Steve Witkoff, who think there's, quite a bit of money to be made for the U.S. if they can figure it out. I think there's a lot of State Department experts who think that's quite inflated. So, Trump also likes to say, look how much money I've delivered for the United States. Maybe Putin will kind of get to him that way. I think there are just so many ways this could go awry.
Yeah, it's hard to see how it doesn't, right? In some ways, but I mean, to the point. Let's assume for a minute it doesn't, and Trump blames Putin, which is of course the equally likely is he starts blaming Zelensky for the fact that there's no agreement on his part, but that one is unlikely to happen at the press conference. He's talked about very serious consequences, very severe consequences, and what do we know about those severe consequences? I mean, Catherine. Yes, India is now under 50% tariffs because it's importing Russian oil. Of course, the big kahuna in this is China.
Yeah.
And just a couple of days ago, the United States decided to agree to another 90-day extension on the tariffs. I mean, raising tariffs now on China is not likely to get you a deal with China. That seems to be pretty important to him as well. So I wonder, where do people see the pressure? And of course, our bilateral trading relationship is $3 billion on the United States, all of which we need, like uranium to power our nuclear reactors, which comes from Russia, and specialized fertilizer that comes from Russia. So how do we see this pressure actually working, Catherine?
So, Firstly, one thing, I'm sorry, Ivo, if I'm going to point out that you've been taken in by the White House propaganda, because India isn't on any Russia oil related tariffs / sanctions yet. They aren't even meant to come in till the 27th. As usual, there was a built-in delay to them coming in. So,
That's good.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm. That's good to know.
maybe India is responding to the threat of them by changing it. But when Trump says this has brought Putin to the table, he's talking about sanctions that haven't even taken effect yet. So I'll just say that.
No, I think it's a very good point. Very good point.
Yeah. Secondly, he would have to, from having spoken to people who know their stuff about the Russian oil trade and the functioning of the economy. He would have to sanction the Russian oil trade so heavily that it effectively stopped. And that would mean that he would have to also halt the shadow fleet. It's a huge ask. And the knock on effect for the world economy is so unpredictable. What it would do to oil prices, what it could do to inflation, all of those things around. So, yeah, we really have to question, is Trump willing to actually take those actions? Now, the India thing is of particular interest to me. I find it fascinating because what Trump might have done before he's even put those sanctions in place is he might have actually just blown up the US-India relationship as a potential bulwark against China in Asia. We've seen expressions of support from Putin, from Modi ever since that came out. And again, they haven't even come into effect yet. So is that worth it? Also, Trump raised the prospect of those tariffs on India as part of an ongoing trade negotiation that he was doing with India. Why would you, if you're going to put sanctions because of Russia's behavior, why do you only pick out one of Russia's customers to do it on? It doesn't make sense. It's not deal making. And so, this constant, I mean, he did. The other issue, of course, with India is that he embarrassed Modi by saying that he'd stop the India-Pakistan conflict. Now, he did get in the middle of that and say stop now, and it stopped. There was a lot of trade. A lot of trade threats were used in that. And again, Trump supporters would, and I've had them say this to me, well, who cares if it works? What you use. The point is, does it solve the problem? And is it sustainable going forward?
Yeah, and the India-Pakistan is one of his 6 wars that he has ended, which is kind of interesting because anybody who knows the history of India-Pakistan, that conflict is still pretty live and well as far as I can tell.
Also, the other one that Donald Trump never has to see a picture of and probably never has before he waded into it, the DRC Rwanda one. I went there a couple of months ago, and as far as the reports I'm getting back from where I was in eastern Congo is that conflict is as bloody as ever.
Yeah.
And that nothing has changed on the ground because, of course, it's the Rwandan-backed rebels and all the different militias who are actually doing the kinetic action on the ground.
Right, and the Rwandans have said that they will stop supporting M23, but of course they're not, and never have. And it's, by the way, it's a conflict that has politics. It needs to be resolved. It's not the same as come to the Oval Office and sign some good agreement. I think it was the Rwandan foreign minister. Of course, we do look to you to make sure that there's implementation of these agreements at the time. Felicia, last word to you on this question of what kind of pressure can they exert on the Russians, assuming that they're willing to do that. How do they see it? And I think Catherine has already put some really important points on the board when it comes to India and the difficulty of the oil sanctions. But when they think about these pressures, what are they actually thinking about?
I think, Catherine, you're 100% right that Trump's willingness to, rattle the oil markets in a way that would be necessary is probably a bridge too far. I mean, one thing they could do is start enforcing the sanctions on the books, because basically what's happened is they haven't written any new ones. So now, there's like a million different shell companies replacing the ones that were sanctioned 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago. I think they could, toughen up the sanctions regime that exists. They could do, they could start to do, I think any gesture of sanctions, like the threat of sanctions, will weigh heavy on the economy. I mean, I also just think in the weapons pipeline, there's like tons they could do. They could, shift from, yeah, JD Vance said on Sunday, we're not going to be funding the Ukraine war anymore, but they could sell a lot more stuff, to Ukraine through Europe. They could encourage them, they could help the Ukrainians do even more deep strikes. They could be, there was some discussion of like security guarantees on this call this week with Trump and the leaders. They could kind of like lean more into that. But, I think the biggest danger here is actually that Trump will just lose interest in this. Like, on the one hand, I think there's a lot of hope that, if this fails, he'll put pressure on Russia. But I think just as likely, if not more, if this isn't going to be his path to the Nobel, Putin has kind of proved himself unreasonable. He's just not going to be willing to kind of keep investing in it. And I think that, is in some ways more dangerous.
Yeah, and actually, I think Felicia, I think that is a likely outcome, walking away, and he sort of intimated that in the gaggle that he did on Air Force One today,
Yeah.
where he kind of said, I have other things to do. I'm not doing this for me, and it fits like, if these guys want to continue fighting, he's talking about fighting as being kids in a play yard, fighting each other as if politics never comes into anything when it comes to these kinds of wars. That seems to be his perspective, and so if they want to continue fighting, it's not my fault. I tried, I did everything, and go home. I mean, in some ways, that may be not the worst outcome, unless he also then starts to negatively affect the weapons flow and intelligence flow and other things to Ukraine, because that would be a terrible outcome. This has been a terrific conversation. Catherine Philp from Kiev and the London Times. Great to have you. Go out and be part of the boozy dinner if that's what you're going to do, and hopefully, if you get up at 3 a.m. to watch the press conference, it will be not because of an error alert, but because there's actually a press conference. Felicia, enjoy your time here in the beautiful Midwest. And we will all be watching very closely what will happen in the next few hours. But I think enriched by this conversation. So thank you all, and thanks for those who tuned in. We'll try to do this again soon, maybe soon after we hear what's going on in Anchorage. But until then, great to see you, and thanks so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.